So we'll go ahead and get started. And if other people come in later, that's awesome. So I'm Mrs. Huber, for those of you who don't know me. I'm going to stop this screen share. And with us today, we have the fabulous Miss Bailey and the fabulous Miss Garner, but the even super awesome Mr. Ian Duncanson from the Beaverton City Library, who has some amazing books and other resources to share with you. Oh, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I've actually spent this pandemic doing like a ton of reading. It's kind of been good for my mental health that I found. I have so many book talks I prepared, and I wish I could get to everything, but I can't. So I just kind of picked some of my favorite ones to share with you guys today. And I also wanted to do a quick plug for the library summer reading program. Some of you guys have probably done summer reading in the past, but we are going to have it again this year. It's going to be a little bit more scaled back, kind of like last year's, but it's still going on. And then the cool thing about summer reading this year is that we also no longer require registration. So we try to make it as easy as possible for you guys to participate now. So all you have to do is either you can pick up a log, you can print one offline, you can even create your own log. And then all we do is ask that you guys read for 15 hours or listen to audiobooks for a total of 15 hours. And then you can come in back to the library starting on July 5th, all the way up until August 15th. Then you get a free book. And there's also a McDonald's coupon for teens. And then you can also write book reviews online. And all the reviews that you write enter you into random gift card drawings that we do every 2 weeks. And so I see actually that's a good segue. Somebody in the chat says, I got sushi. So that we actually have a sushi gift card that you could potentially win this year. So it's going to be awesome. And if you go to, let me put the website into the chat for you guys really quick before I get started on my book talks here. So it's just beavertonlibrary.org. And then I think it's /SRP will take you to the summer reading page. I hope I'm right. I'm trying to remember all our web shortcuts here. So yeah, we're going to start that on June 1st. So any of you guys are going to be reading over the summer. This summer will probably be still like halfway socially distanced, I'm thinking. So you guys will probably still have some chances to do some reading. Yes, so without further ado, once again, my name's Ian and I'm from the Beaverton City Library. And thank you guys so much for inviting me here to let you guys to let me talk to you guys during lunch today. I'm just going to go through a few of the books that I've read during this pandemic that really stuck with me, that are going to be some of my go-to recommendations down into the future. I feel like even during the pandemic, when publishers were delaying everything, there's still been some just awesome book releases this year. So the first one I brought for you guys is this one called Dragon Hoops. It's by Gene Yang. Has anyone read Gene Yang graphic novels before? He wrote American Born Chinese. That was one of his. He wrote Level Up, which is about like somebody who has a gaming addiction. So he's just a really awesome cartoonist. He's actually branched out too, and he's writing DC and Marvel stuff now too. And well, at least DC. I know he did a Superman one just recently called Superman versus the Klan. And it's pretty cool. Like it's kind of like a throwback to old Superman stories. He's fighting the Ku Klux Klan and racism in the city that he goes to. But this one is probably my favorite thing that he's done so far. And so this one's called Dragon Hoops. And before this came out, I read that, everybody was saying like, oh, Gene Yang he's doing a sports graphic novel. And I was like, I never read sports stories. Like I'm not like personally, I'm like nothing against sports, but I've just never really been a huge sports fan myself. So I was like, oh, this one just doesn't have any interest for me. But of course, I had to pick it up and read it because it was Gene Yang and because everybody was saying how awesome it was. And so this is a true story. And he is a teacher in Oakland, California, who he's a graphic novelist, but he also teaches in a high school in California. And his school had the chance to go to this big basketball tournament that they'd actually lost back in the 1980s, like before he ever taught there. And so, when it came up, it was like a big deal at school. And it was also a big deal in the state of California because it was like one of the big state high school basketball championships. So he was like, there's a story here, but how do I tell the story? Because I'm not a sports fan. I'm kind of just like a slightly nerdy guy who loves drawing. I like superhero stories. I like to watch Marvel movies with my family. I never watch sports. I know nothing about sports. How am I going to possibly tell this story? And so part of the graphic novel is about his sort of battle with himself to tell the story and to figure out how he's going to do it and how he's going to overcome, something that he doesn't think is really an interest that he has. And then the other part of it too is also just about basketball and the history of his school participating in this tournament in the 80s and then losing it when the coach was on the team. So in the 1980s, the coach was just a team member, and they lost it possibly because of I guess you could argue here, but it was kind of a bad ref call. So they lost this tournament, and then they see this return to the tournament as a way of kind of redeeming themselves and coming back and winning a tournament that he lost years ago. So it's a story of that, and it's also a story about the history of the sport of basketball. And so he goes all the way back to the 1800s. Basketball was sort of first invented, for lack of a better word for it, invented or sort of developed over the years. And then into the 20th century, he talks a little bit about racism in basketball. And I actually didn't know this at all. I knew the history of baseball because I'd read a Jackie Robinson biography, but I didn't really know that the basketball had a really bad history with racism in it too. So he talks a little bit about that in this book too, and about how even basketball teams were segregated, and there were teams for Black players and teams for white players. And I did not know that in the history of the sport. I didn't really know anything about it. So I learned a lot about the history of basketball in this too. And yeah, so in the chat, somebody's saying racism is everywhere. And yes, unfortunately, this book reminds us of that. But it also, it shows that we have actually come a long way. But that also, it's important to know, I think, to know the history of this so that we can confront it into the future. Make society better for everybody. So really, the story is awesome. He juggles kind of all of these different stories at the same time. But it's also just a really entertaining comic book story, and it's kind of an underdog sports story. So I recommend it to even non-sports fans like myself. And I also think that this is one that I've loved to bring up in my other classes that I've talked to this year, is illustrating an important point, how important it is to sometimes read outside of your reading comfort zone. And you'll learn something that you didn't know, and you also may discover something that you didn't think you would love too. So going into it, I didn't think I was going to love Dragon Hoops, but I did, and now it's one of my favorite books from this year. So that's Dragon Hoops by Gene Yang. If you guys haven't read it, highly recommend it. And so the next one I'm going to book talk. This one was awesome too. Let me find my notes really quick here. I'm kind of disorganized, and it's hard to keep everything straight because I kind of have this small desk here. Oh yeah, here we go. So the next one I brought for you guys today is called We Dream of Space. It's by Erin and Trada Kelly. And this is actually my first book that I've read by her. And so this book is cool because it's kind of it's partially historical fiction. It takes place in January of 1986, which was the month when NASA did their big Challenger launch. I'm kind of backlit here, and I kind of keep coming in and out of shadows. Hopefully you guys can see me. So it's 1986. It's the month when NASA was going to do their big Challenger launch in the 1980s. So I actually remember this from when I was a kid. So it was kind of interesting to read a book written nowadays about something that I remember from when I was actually, I think it was in second grade in 1986 in elementary school. So this story centers on three middle school students from the same family, Cash, Fitch, and Bird. And so Cash is kind of the oldest of the three. But he also failed school last year, and so he has to repeat the seventh grade with his two siblings. And then Fitch is the pro video game player of it, and so he's since it's the 1980s, he's always hanging out at the video arcade. And so reading this reminded me of all these awesome arcade games and old video games that I used to play when I was a really young kid when I first started gaming. So that was cool for me. And then kind of the main character of the story is Bird, who is this, she's really, really into science and taking things apart. So she deconstructs her family's VCR, which, once again, I'm dating myself here. For those of you guys who don't know, VCR was the tape player before DVD and Blu-ray and disc-based media. And so she takes the stuff apart and diagrams it, and so you can see some of her diagrams in the book too. But she's also really into NASA and following the Challenger launch, and she's really excited about it. And she dreams of becoming an astronaut herself. But for those of you guys who don't know the history, the Challenger launch actually ended up being this a big tragedy. So they had these, I think it was, I want to say 7 or 8 different astronauts who were going to go up in space. They all came from different walks of life. There was a teacher who was, going to be one of the first teacher astronauts ever. And then there were scientists and, different people that they needed for the space launch. And right after it launched, it blew up. And it did it on national TV. So I actually watched it in school. And I remember being just really traumatized by it, by what happened here. And so this book is kind of like, it takes place in the days leading up to that launch. And then it also takes place in the aftermath of the tragedy. And when Bird, this character who is just really into science, is just completely crushed by what she saw, on TV when the space shuttle blew up. And so she kind of starts to think like, oh, we just need to give up all these scientific aspirations, and that NASA is it's just made out to be this whole horrible tragedy. So ultimately, this book is uplifting though, because it's about kind of rebounding from tragedy and not giving up in the face of it and continuing on. So I mean, as you guys know, we still have NASA today. They still do space missions. They still study outer space. We remember the people that we lost in this, but we also don't give up, and we continue to make progress scientifically. So it's a really good story about three close siblings who are in middle school, but it's also about the history of NASA and the space program, and then the Challenger tragedy too. So you learn a little bit about history, and it's also just a really good character study. So that's We Dream of Space, Aaron and Trada Kelly. This is one of my favorite books I read this year too. I have a thing for historical fiction that was set when I was a kid, and it kind of makes me feel old too, because I mean I remember all this, and I'm not really that old, I promise. But it's historical fiction now. All right, and then the next book, which one should I do? It's so hard when I've read so much awesome stuff this year. Oh, I'm gonna do this one. So this is another graphic novel. This one's called The Trespassers. It's by Brenna Bard. If any of you guys like mystery stories, this one is one of my favorite ones from this year. And like I said, this is a graphic novel, so it's all comic and all illustrated. This one is about a girl named Gabby, and she's vacationing at her parents' lake house. And all she wants to do on this vacation is just like sit back with a stack of mystery novels, not be bothered by anybody, have some peace and quiet, and not have to do anything basically all week long. But so when they get there, they find out that actually, they have these like neighbors that are there vacationing from Chicago. And so there's this girl named Paige and her younger brother there. And her parents are like, no, you got to go hang out with these other kids that are there vacationing. You can't just sit around and read books. So of course, Gabby, being bookish, she doesn't really want to do this, but she kind of ends up having to hang out with these kids all summer long. And so they see this like creepy abandoned lake house that they find out there. And it's strangely enough, it's perfectly preserved. So, it's not all like kind of crumbling and decaying. It's just sort of there. And they, of course, it arouses their curiosity. And Gabby, being a big murder mystery reader, she starts to kind of write this story about what she thinks happened there, like who got killed here, or why is it abandoned? And she starts to kind of come up with these like crazy, outlandish possibilities for what happened there. And Paige and her brother aren't like they're kind of like not the most ethical kids ever. So they convince them to break into this lake house and start exploring and investigating and figuring out what happened there. And meanwhile, there's like kind of like creepy old guy they see around. So there's a really compelling mystery to the story. And then it's also about this relationship between Gabby and Paige, her new friend, and how far she should go, doing things that she knows is wrong, like trespassing at this lake house. But she has a curious mind, and so she really wants to solve this mystery. So I recommend this if you guys like mystery books, or just kind of generally books that are a little bit creepy, but I wouldn't really say it's a scary book. And so this one's called The Trespassers by Brenna Bard. And then, I'm going to do this one. This one's awesome. And then this one I would recommend if anyone is a Percy Jackson fan or anything like this. This is like one of my favorite kind of like, it's not really a series of books. It's kind of more just an imprint. But this one's called City of the Plague God. It's by Sarwat Shada. And then this is under the Rick Riordan Presents imprint. So what Rick Riordan does with this series is he's like, I've already told like all of the stories about these Greek myths and Norse myths with the Magnus Chase series and Egyptian mythology. So I'm going to get authors from different cultures to write stories that deal with the myths of their cultures. And so this one is by Sarwat Shada, and he is he's British, but he's Iraqi. So his parents are Iraqi, and he's an immigrant in the UK. And I got to watch a cool interview with him on YouTube after I read this book, because I liked it so much. I wanted to find out a little bit more about the author. So this book deals with Mesopotamian mythology, which is like one of the most ancient civilizations ever. And it's sort of the civilization that existed in the area where like Iraq is, and Iran. But this one is kind of like Percy Jackson in that it has like a normal kid in New York City, and his name is Sikander or Sheikh Aziz. And he has a normal job where he just helps out at his parents. His parents like run this awesome Middle Eastern deli in the city. And so he like helps him run the deli, and it's also a convenience store. And so he helps him like make the falafel and all this Middle Eastern food that his parents have brought to the United States. And his older brother, Mo, has just passed away. And so his parents, rely on him more than ever to help out at their deli and keep their business running. Of course, this being a Rick Riordan Presents book, that there are going to be all kinds of, ancient gods that come into the story. And so one day, he is visited by this god Nergal, who is the ancient Mesopotamian god of disease. And I'd never heard of this god, but it was and he actually wrote this pre-pandemic, but it was kind of weird reading a book about the god of disease during a pandemic. So Nergal invades Sikh's life, and he's looking for this treasure that Mo supposedly stole from Iraq back when his family was still in Iraq. And of course, Nergal threatens to destroy the entire city if he doesn't get this treasure back or what he's looking for. So now he has to team up with Sikh has to team up with his brother's friend Daoud, and they have to go on this adventure into a world of Mesopotamian gods and legends, and they have to try to stop Nergal and save the city. So they team up with like the goddess Ishtar is like one of the heroes in the book. And then you also learn a little bit about the epic legend of Gilgamesh, which is like this classic Mesopotamian legend that's sort of been passed down. And then like a lot of other, Western fantasy and mythology is also partially based on the legend of Gilgamesh. So you learn about that too. So I highly recommend this one if you guys like Percy Jackson or Magnus Chase. And I don't think it has any sequels yet. So you don't have to feel overwhelmed. If you read it and you like it, there may be a sequel coming out soon. But right now it's just a single book. And it's an awesome adventure story too. Really good fun. And I saw some talk in the chat here. Somebody saying, I don't think it's available on Sora, but this is a good plug. If you guys have your e-access cards, you can also access all of the books through the public library. And I'm confident that we do have City of the Plague God available as an ebook through the Washington County Library System too. So you guys get like basically like two awesome big libraries. If you combine, you can hook your Sora account up with the public library account too, and it's pretty easy to do. So there's a plug for that. All right, let me see. The next book I read that I want to share with you guys. Oh, let's do this one. So this is I'm a big sucker for kind of like monster stories and alien invasion stories. And this book is awesome. It's called Bloom. It's by Kenneth Oppel. And he's read a lot of other, written a lot of other really good adventure books in the past, but this might be my favorite one that he's done so far. And then this book is the first book in a series called Overthrow. And I believe, I'm sure the second one's out, and I think possibly the third one's out now. And I've got to get around to reading the sequel, so I like this one a lot. So this one's called Bloom by Kenneth Oppel. This book is really cool. It takes place on this island that's kind of off of the coast of, it's like a Canadian island. It's off the coast of Vancouver, BC, so it's kind of just remote. And if you guys like scary books about monsters and weird science, and it's a little bit like maybe a Goosebumps book or something. So on this island, everybody wakes up one day and they see this mysterious black thorny vines that start sprouting up all over the island. And they grow like, they literally, while you're watching them, you can watch them grow in front of you. So they grow super fast. And there are also these strange rains that come down and seem to feed the vines everywhere. So the vines like send out these like runners underground everywhere and then sprout up more everywhere. And they also create these monster plants underground that can actually swallow anything. So they swallow cars and cows, and yes, of course, even people. And so there are these three kids in the book, and they also, the kids all deal with these weird allergies. So like one of them is allergic to almost everything in the world, including water. So she literally can't even take a shower without breaking out in hives and everything. But she finds out that she's not allergic to this rain. So she runs outside. She gets really excited about it. And she's like collecting the rainwater everywhere in giant jugs and everything. And she's like, yes, I finally found this kind of water that I'm not allergic to anymore. And then another one is allergic to pollen and everything. But they find that they have these sort of like natural, everybody else is really susceptible to the rain, but they find that they can kind of naturally ward everything off. So of course, they're the people that can get to the bottom of this, what's going on with these vines and these like monstrous plants that are popping up underground, and they swallow things and they slowly digest it. But luckily you can escape actually. So you get swallowed and you have to get out as fast as possible because there's all this like acid that's underground. Yeah, it's a really crazy book, and I don't want to give anything away, but they have to find out what the source of this weird rain that's creating these monstrous plants and vines that are basically like taking over this entire island are. So you guys are gonna have to read and find out. If you like thrillers, you like scary books, if you enjoyed the Goosebumps series, this one is an awesome book, Bloom by Kenneth Oppel. And then, let me see. Oh, I'll do this one. I know. So this one was one of my favorite graphic novels I've read this year too. This one is When Stars Are Scattered. And then this one is actually by two people, Victoria Jameson and Omar Mohammed. And so it is the true story of Omar Mohammed. And Victoria Jameson basically is just this graphic novelist that tells the story. If any of you guys read Roller Girl by her, she was the writer of that one. And she used to live in Portland. I think she's since moved because I tried to get her back to come back to the library and give another talk, but she had moved. I can't remember where she moved to. So unfortunately, she's not in Portland anymore because she's one of my favorite graphic novelists going right now. So this one is, like I said, it's a true story from Omar Mohammed. So he basically just told her his story, and then she kind of put it into graphic novel form for him. And it is about him being a Somalian refugee growing up in this really crowded refugee camp in Kenya. So during the civil war in Somalia, he and a lot of other people had to flee, and they sort of just ended up, spread out everywhere. And he ended up in a refugee camp in Kenya, and his mom had to leave to go to work, and his dad died. So it's basically just Omar and his younger brother Hassan who are in this refugee camp. And Hassan is also nonverbal, and so Omar kind of has to take care of him and make sure he is going to school, and that Hassan has everything he needs to eat because he can't talk. So Omar is kind of like the sole caretaker for his brother after their mom has left and their dad has died. And so both of them live in this refugee camp, and they dream about getting out any way they can. It's a story about Omar going to school for the first time. So Omar is, he's a naturally really smart kid, but he's never actually been to a formal school. He's kind of just learned everything he has, from different people in the refugee camps. He has a woman that kind of took them under their wing, and she teaches them a little bit. So he gets a chance to go to school for the first time, but all the classes are taught in English. And at this point in the story, Omar's English is pretty limited. So he's like, well, I have this great chance to go to school and really learn and possibly, get out of the refugee camp and immigrate somewhere. But that means I'm going to have to leave my brother Hassan, possibly behind, and I'm not going to be able to watch him all day, every day while I'm taking these classes. And then also the classes are in English, and my English is only so. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to keep up with the schoolwork. So it's a little bit about that conflict, but it's also about the hopefulness that he has. And ultimately he does get to immigrate to the United States. and tell a story, in comic book or graphic novel form. So it's just a really hopeful story. I recommend this to any of you guys who have enjoyed books like I Will Always Write Back, or I Am Malala, or we actually had a couple years ago we had Call Me American, which was the Beaverton Reads pick, and that one was also about by a Somalian refugee who had ultimately immigrated to the United States. So if you guys like true stories about immigrants that are, it's he has trouble in his life, but it's also ultimately hopeful and uplifting. And it's told in graphic novel form, so you get to learn a little bit about life in these refugee camps and what people in the Kenyan camps go through. But also ultimately about how they stick together, they look out for each other. So there's hopefulness and upliftingness in that too. So that's When Stars Are Scattered by Victoria Jameson and Omar Mohammed. Absolutely love this, along with Dragon Hoops. I think this is my favorite graphic novel I read this year. It's going to be a book I constantly recommend to people. And I think she actually won some big awards for it too. How much more time do I have?
You have just like 2 more minutes.
Oh, sweet. Okay, I'll do some quick recommendations then. So a couple other books I have to recommend are Everything Sad is Untrue, and this one is by Daniel Nayeri. This was the big Prince winner this year, which is like the Oscar of books for kind of grade 6 through 12. This is another really good book about growing up as an immigrant in the United States, and it's basically based on his real experiences. So he is an Iranian immigrant, and so he talks about his mom immigrating here to escape the Iranian secret police because she had converted to Christianity, which after the Iranian Revolution in the late 70s became grounds for an arrest. So he moved here, and his mom remarried to an abusive man. But ultimately, like he weaves fantasy into this book. So he talks a little bit about, standing in front of classes and telling his classmates all of these fantastical stories from his own culture, kind of based on the 1001 Nights, the Arabian mythology, which is, what Aladdin is from, and multiple other stories that you guys probably know. So it's fantastical, but it's also about, being an immigrant, trying to figure out how you fit in. And build a life for yourself, and also overcoming hardship. I really, really, really love this book. I thought it was beautifully written. I think the author's awesome too, because I saw a talk with him, and he gives really good interviews, and he's funny, but he also talks at the same time about his background and about coming from a totally different culture. So that's Everything Sad is Untrue. Love this book, and it was basically the Oscar winner of grade 6 through 12 books this year. And then another one I read that I want to plug really quick was A Wish in the Dark by Christina Soontornvat. This one kind of read a little bit like a Rick Riordan book maybe too, but it was more contemporary. It's slightly dystopian, so it's got a little bit of like the Hunger Games or Divergent influence to it. But this one is kind of based on Thai culture, which is the author's own culture. And it's about 2 kids who have to escape from this prison camp in this. It doesn't say it's Thailand, but it's a country that's heavily based on Thailand. And so he has to go up, and he goes to the city where this it's kind of ruled by this really corrupt dictator sort of character. And he ultimately has to save the city and also evade the authorities because they're trying to put him back in this prison camp too. So that's A Wish in the Dark. Really like this one. It was one of my favorite adventure books too. And if you guys like Percy Jackson, it's a great read. All right. Whew. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Ian, for telling us all those. I'm feeling very excited about a lot of them, and it wasn't even planned, but most of them we have on Sora too.
Awesome. Yeah. It sounds like you guys have good book choices on Sora. And anything that you guys don't have on Sora, like I said, we're definitely going to have it through the public library, so you can kind of combine them to make it one big library.
Yes, and feel free. So like I know my students, you can ask me how to connect we've done it a couple times in our help sessions, how to connect your Sora account to the public library, but I can help any of the rest of you too if you just send me an email, and I can get that for you too. So
yeah.
Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed our lunch with a librarian. Have a good Friday.